It being 7:30, I propose the question that the House do now adjourn, and I call the honourable member for Deakin.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, each time we arrive here in Canberra and we come into question time, most particularly, we see a very self-satisfied Prime Minister and a very self-satisfied government over there, all backslapping and laughing and lecturing to us in the opposition about how things are going so well and that how we would have the audacity to ask questions of this government. But the failures and endless list of broken promises from this government have pushed so many Australians, many in my electorate as well, into a very dire situation. Our economy is crumbling under the weight of Labor's ongoing poor decisions and mismanagement. Sadly, since the election, in the just over 2 years since the election, Australians are now poorer because of this Labor government than they were 2 years ago. Under Labor's watch and failed economic policies, we know inflation and interest rates will remain higher for longer. This is according to the Reserve Bank. More than 2 years into this disastrous government's term and after 3 terrible budgets, we're losing, as Australians, the economic battle on 2 fronts: persistent homegrown inflation and an economy that's quite frankly grinding to a halt. And we see that every day with businesses going into administration, liquidation, and now increasingly people being made redundant and losing their jobs. We find ourselves at the back of the pack when it comes to fighting inflation. And since December, Australia's been the only country to see an increase in inflation which now exceeds 10%, with interest rates also rising 12 times under Labor. Households are in recession, with no growth in GDP per capita for over a year, for 5 consecutive quarters. There are very grim economic times being faced by Australians, and sadly there are even further grim economic times ahead. Labor's energy policies have been another absolute failure. Despite the Prime Minister promising on 97 occasions before the election that he would reduce household energy bills by $275 a year, Australians are now paying some of the highest energy prices in the world. Yesterday, in fact, I met with a building company who employs many hundreds of Australians who told me that their monthly energy bill in their manufacturing business of building products has increased from $15,000 a month 2 years ago to $50,000 a month just 2 years later. $15,000 a month in energy costs for this building manufacturing business 2 years ago, and it's $50,000 today. And the owner said to me, "Michael, that increase just gets passed on into the products we sell, which ultimately get passed on to the Australians who buy those homes at the end." In one of my portfolio areas of housing, we just see one disaster after another. It's remarkable that at a time when we're building fewer homes than we've built for over a decade, when we have fewer homes being approved to be built, when we have first home buyers at record lows, with all of that happening, Labor's decided to run their secretive Big Australia policy that we know they've wanted to do every time they get into government. More than a million new migrants in that 2-year period of this government, yet we're building fewer homes than ever. 1 million more migrants and about 260,000 new homes. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that that is the cause of so many of the issues we're seeing in housing. Rents up by 22%. No wonder you go to an open inspection for a rental property in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane, and sometimes you find lines around the block because people are so desperate to find a home. 1 million new migrants when you're not building homes is one of the most irresponsible things that you can do as a government. An Australian government's primary role is to make the life of our citizens easier. This government is making Australians' lives harder, and they shouldn't come to Canberra laughing and giggling and patting each other on the back when they're inflicting so much pain on everyday Australians.